I'm seeing more and more calls for some kind of central inspirational leadership amongst Democrats, amongst liberals. One social media post is, where is the leader who can make 1 million people march? A liberal political analyst in an interview, I think on Midas Touch, either Midas Touch or Brian Taylor Cohen, was saying that the GOP, the advantages of the GOP are cohesiveness and audacity. And I immediately thought to myself, yes, the reason they're so cohesive and so audacious is because they're supported, they're funded by billionaires. The GOP is cohesive because the GOP wants, the GOP wants one thing: slavery. They want the Confederacy 2.0. And the reason that they are audacious is because they're being encouraged by their leaders to break the law, to do illegal things. I would also argue that the GOP is audacious because they're in the power to do so. They are able to act from positions of power to essentially ignore the rules and violate the law without suffering consequences. So far, the only consequences they seem to suffer are social. So instead, I argue we don't need the middle white class values of the man on horseback and the ability or the authority to break all the rules, move fast and break things, as Elon Musk likes to say. I think we're much better off without such leaders. We don't need a liberal Donald Trump. In my study of the martial arts, I quickly learned two basic principles. One is never fight your opponent's fight. Second, never give your opponents what they want. And I think that developing a central leadership amongst liberals, amongst the Democrats, is playing into the GOP's hands. What the GOP wants is they want a central resistance. They want everybody organized into a big, cohesive group. And they can then smother that cohesive group through the power of state repression. What they fear, what the GOP fears, is everybody acting all at once. So even if they take out the leadership or the head committee of a couple of groups, there are still at least 3 other groups still active and resisting. When I talk about state repression, let me give you an example. Occupy Wall Street. New York police were making very little inroads against the Occupy Wall Street protesters with their encampments and coordinated actions until they were able to borrow stingers from the FBI. Stinger is a device that creates a faux cell tower and is able to intercept all cell phone traffic. So using this, the New York police were able to identify the leaders, i.e. the ones with the most phone traffic, and then track them down using their cell phones and arrest them. And the protesters, the Occupy Wall Street demonstrators, quickly learned that when their cell phones stopped working, that meant a raid on the camps was imminent. Contrast this with San Francisco, the 1990s, the business as usual protests, no business as usual protests. Those ones were not centralized. They were based on coordination rather than leadership. And the Oakland and San Francisco police found that no matter who they arrested, how many they arrested, the protests and the demonstrations continued because there were no leaders to arrest that would stop the protests. Yes, there were coordinators, and yes, they wound up in jail, being held either without bond or with so many charges stacked against them they couldn't pay bond. But the protests still continued. So I offer this leaderless resistance as a more effective form of liberal resistance, of democratic action, than that of a centralized leadership. Let me illustrate a point here. So, what the GOP wants, particularly Trump, drawing this through my camera lens here, is for all the liberals to come together into one monolithic movement led by a central leader who will then directly oppose the GOP, directly oppose MAGA. And this is exactly what they want, because the GOP can then use the power of the state to completely overwhelm all liberal resistance, because they will be able to capture the leader, put the leader on a show trial, and consolidate all of their fascism through these show trials. Whereas this is what the GOP, what conservatives truly fear, is all of these different liberal movements acting together, coordinated, but not necessarily under a central leadership of some kind. So it is very difficult to quash this, and instead the GOP, the conservatives, are overwhelmed and subject to social and economic justice, and once more required to obey the rule of law. So, what the GOP wants, as I said before, is simple. They want power, but they don't want abstract power. They want concrete power. They want slavery. As far as the GOP is concerned, as far as conservative philosophy is concerned, all of our social ills are solved by enslaving everyone, either legally or economically. Liberals, however, are not seeking such concrete power. What liberals are seeking is freedom, which in itself isn't abstract. So the result is that it seems like we're divided on many fronts: trans rights, feminism, Black Lives Matter, and so forth. So it looks like we are splintered and we are not cohesive. But that in itself is our strength, because each one of these facets of liberal protest, of liberal resistance, identifies a weak point in conservative policies, in the conservative philosophy, in the GOP's very structure.